You will. Okay, so one of the things to take in consideration is the class, the way it's being taught is looking at sort of definitions, right? So you look here at you look here at the objectives, explain why obeying the law is only the first step to behaving ethically, which is the example I just gave, right? So you could obey the law and do everything legal. That doesn't mean you're not hurting or affecting negatively and impacting the lives of others. Doesn't mean you're providing a shoddy product because you can get away with it. The ethics of things are moral, but the moral capacity of our ethics is cultural, right? So if we are in India and I decide to sell you a beef burger, that might not fly so well because of the cultural significance and relevance of cows in India. Whereas in the US, if I serve you a beef burger, assuming you're not vegan or something, no one seems to care because cows don't have a significant cultural relevance, religious relevance to the people. So one thing would be not only sacrilegious, but it would be considered unethical, immoral to do. Whereas in another country, it's perfectly fine. So ethics is also very much culturally driven, it's morally driven, it's perspective, right? So what's ethical, what's right and wrong is a perspective from a group of people based upon their shared practices, beliefs, and systems that state what they feel is right and wrong. That means something could be unethical, and you may feel it's completely wrong or morally incomprehensible. Likewise, a group, a cultural group, or a group of people may feel something is ethically correct or true, morally fine, but deep down inside, it could be wrong because it could be destroying their society, destroying their people, and they may not even realize it. So a lot of times, the root of ethics and morality has to deal with whether or not it creates or reinforces social stability, if it reinforces sort of practices or behaviors that create growth and peace and wellness for the people. And that's sort of the guideline of the social structure, the social functionality of something is or isn't within a good ethical practice or moral practice because of how it affects the greater good of others. And I say greater good in a sense where maybe something is, like for example, they'll take animals and they'll test animals, right? We do a lot of the scientific research we do is done through the torture and testing of animals. So lab rats, they take lab rats, they give them cancer, they give them diseases, they mutate them, they do all this research on lab rats to help figure out how the body works. And from that research, they can move on to clinical research with humans, people, or chimps or monkeys or whatever. And there's obviously ethical and moral standards that people have issues with that because it's affecting, another living creature. But in the same end, if you didn't do it, what would happen scientifically? How would you figure out these things? It's sort of like saying, is it wrong to eat meat when the animals of the earth kill and eat each other every day, every hour? You got animals running around chewing and eating and biting and hunting each other. And it's through the culling of each other that they create this sort of ecology or this balance. Whereas if you let the animals just kind of, if you didn't let them do what they do, you'd have too much of one animal destroying the ecology, right? So if you didn't have wolves hunting deer, for example, or cougars or wild mountain lions, whatever predator in the area, the deer would eat up all the grass, and then they would destroy the ecology because there'd be nothing alive. So the ethical standpoint of, it's immoral to eat meat, it's bad to eat meat, but in the same end, if you didn't have animals cruelly killing each other, the whole earth would be out of whack. it would be unstable. So moral perspective at times is perspective based upon our own feelings, agendas, motivations. But if you actually look at a global perspective or a greater perspective, you would see that there's balance in the predation that animals do on each other. So we as humans are in some ways, this is obviously becoming more philosophical, but that's what it is. We as humans are actually in a more higher capacity. Our wellness and understanding of our environment, the capacity to learn and make decisions and judgments and to empathize beyond what our own motivations feel, meaning our nature feels. It's something that some animals lack that capacity, or they have a diminished capacity to do that over their own instincts. So this causes us to sort of question our own ethics and morality and to decide what is and what isn't right. Some people, just the thought of killing another animal, living creature, brings them to tears because they empathize with that animal as being alive and having feelings and emotions, and it represents who they are. It hurts them, and that's why they might be vegan or don't want to eat animals, even though the balance of nature is sort of dependent upon the death, the hunting, the survival of creatures against one another to create a balanced ecosystem. So, is it unethical? Is it immoral? If you look at nature, is nature beyond ethics and morality, or is it the guiding stone to what is ethical morality? Or more realistically, do you need to have a higher intelligence and perspective of your environment to understand what is and isn't? Because if you didn't, you wouldn't see it as being good and bad. You say, oh, that bear trying to eat me is bad. It's the boogeyman. That lion is bad. It wants to eat me. It's the boogeyman. But when you have a profound understanding of nature, you have the intelligence to be aware of what's going on. You then see more clearly the environment, the nature of the bear, the lion, why it's important, why it is what it is, and if they weren't there, what would go wrong with nature. So morality and ethics also requires intelligence, awareness, wisdom to understand what is the greater good, right? So maybe something is or isn't the greater good because of the circumstances, but we think it or believe it is. And our cultural bias also affects and implicates the belief systems of ethics. So I'm prefacing all of this before we get into the business of it, because it's kind of, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's almost completely dependent upon the culture of our society that's shaping the framework of what is ethics, what is ethical and moral. With that said, this chapter has absolutely nothing to do with what is ethical or what is moral behavior in business. It's not trying to guide you and discuss what's right and wrong. I will talk about that to you as my students, but this chapter is not going to guide you on that. The chapter is just going to give you definitions, concepts, and framework on ethics and morality. What are some thoughts and ideas behind ethics and morality? What is the definition of ethics? What is considered unethical behavior? And these are the textbook definitions that you do need to remember and understand. But in the same end, when you go out there and you're working and you're dealing with people, this all goes out the window, right? It's survival. It's what you can get away with. It's what other people can get away with. Is what people feel is right or what's wrong, what they do and don't want to do. Is based upon the will and motivation of others that sort of determines the environment you're dealing with, which is completely different than what we're talking about. So for the most part, to really have a truly moral standing or moral understanding, it requires a higher level of intelligence. You have to be aware of what you're dealing with, the environmental factors of how things are set up and why they are in place, to have a great understanding of why something is moral or not moral, which is why I give the example of nature. Animals are running around doing their thing. And because we got about 10 minutes left, because they're running around doing their thing, from a lower perspective, it might seem crazy and dangerous and wild. from a higher perspective, it's natural and required because the world will cease to function if that wasn't the case. So when we're dealing with business, a lot of the ethics and morality in business is determined based upon how it governs our social structure, how it governs the peace of our society and the wellness of our environments. Those are the metrics that they're using to determine ethics and morality in business. So, for example, if you're in a position where you're having to determine to take a shortcut with how your environmental practices, let's use Donald Trump, for example. Donald Trump wants to scale back on certain EPA measures because they're, to him, antiquated and they interfere with business. You can't drill here, you can't frack here, you can't do business, can't do certain things in certain areas because of the risk it poses to the environment. So he wants to sort of pull back on that. And the reason why people put these protections in place is because those businesses will actually destroy the environment. So yes, they're not making money. It's not creating jobs, not creating business opportunities. Because if you allowed it to happen, it would destroy the environment. So just because something's good for business, good for jobs, good for families, good for opportunity, doesn't mean it's good for the communal whole, the earth, the society, the world we live in. So prospectively, though, he feels like it's okay. And prospectively for others, they feel like it's not, it's a problem. So, you guys sitting in this virtual classroom are going to decide the ethics and standards of tomorrow. And I'll tell you this, even if you know something's wrong, if it's legal, if it's okay, you'll know if something's wrong and you'll know why it is or isn't wrong. But sometimes the opportunity that it presents to you, the benefit that it gives you, supersedes the morality and ethics of what you know or feel is right or wrong. And that's another issue that's not often discussed so much, is the concept of temptation, and how temptation for the personal benefit of ourselves, our constituents, directly affects our decision making. So you may feel or know this is not right, or this could be a problem, but in many cases we can convince ourselves that it's okay. We can tell ourselves that it's not a problem, and that if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If it's good for me, it's good for everyone else. When in fact you may be destroying a situation, a society, a people, whatever. And we can get into dozens of examples throughout history of people doing this. And in some cases, people not even being aware that their decisions are affecting us negatively. Like I gave an example I gave in class last time was how you have food, pesticides, and herbicides being used to help facilitate low-cost agriculture or lowering the cost and the efficiency of agriculture. But these pesticides and herbicides and poisons that are put in the food have a negative implication on our health and wellness, which is scientifically known in the community, the academic community, the science community. There's research that shows that these things have a dangerous impact on our body, but they're still allowed to be used because it's cheap or efficient, or it helps make people more money and more profit, even though it's at the expense and wellness of others. So is that a moral, immoral, unethical behavior or capacity, even though it's legal? But the more important thing is you don't know about it. So sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, the capacity for higher knowledge and higher understanding enlightens the concept of morality and ethics. So if you don't know there's a problem with your food, you don't think there's a problem with it. If you understood through the education of yourself and your surroundings that there's a problem with the food, suddenly an ethical and moral dilemma occurs. Wait a minute, this food I'm eating has poison in it. I just read a study. It says that it affects, it has, it could cause fetal problems for unborn children. It causes health problems, neurological problems, all these issues, digestional issues with your health, your wellness, diabetes, inflammation, disease vectors. It causes all these problems. But if you don't understand that, it's not an issue for you. If you don't, it's maybe too complicated for some people to understand because the scientific literature is complicated. And if the television isn't telling you, if your favorite Instagrammer isn't telling you, then you don't know, right? You have no idea. But the reality, though, is that you go to a store, you'll see organic on the shelves, and it's more expensive, and people are buying it because some people know, they're aware. But then the question is, if you can't afford organic, is it fair that you have to eat that crap? Do you have to put that in your body? You know, is that fair for you? So the lack of knowledge and awareness sometimes allows an ethical or moral dilemma to maintain itself hidden and the agendas therein to be secret, such that there is no ethical issue. There is no sense of immorality because you're just not aware the problem exists. It's the same thing with agriculture and farming. The the um, they use fertilizer to fertilize crops. The fertilizer dips into the water, the groundwater underneath the soil. The groundwater washes out into the ocean, and the fertilizers that they use to grow America's crops wash away into the ocean. And the fertilizers change the microbiome of the ocean, which negatively impacts the algae and the life there. And it creates these very deadly, they're called deadly algae blooms. And they've been happening all over the southern coast of the southern Midwest coast of the United States because of agricultural processes, which is destroying, the oceans of the southern coast of America. So, this is something that people thought is safe to do, and now it's not. In ancient Mesopotamia, and you probably are familiar with this from your high school and classes, but the way they used to farm, they did use the agricultural process of taking the water from a river, creating a little rift from the river into their crops, and irrigating their crops using local rivers. So what happened is over the millennia of doing that, they eroded the soil away, the topsoil, and eroding away the topsoil of their farmland made the land barren. So literally, there's areas of Mesopotamia that were lush with life that now is barren because of agricultural processes that were done thousands of years ago that actually eroded away the soil. So sometimes something that seems good and smart, creates problems, and something that was ethical or moral or okay, it wound up being completely destructive to an entire society or entire culture. So a lot of the debate with ethics and morality requires the inception of seeking higher intelligence, higher awareness, higher knowledge, because without the higher knowledge and higher understanding of what's around you, you can't always make a smart decision on what's ethical or moral, because then you're really sort of subjected to the cultural and social influence of what tells you is ethical or moral versus having the higher intellect to make a decision on what is or what isn't. So I'll leave you on that class. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email directly. And we will be seeing each other again via Zoom the same way for pretty much the remainder of the semester. I will give you a heads up beforehand if we're having a live class, but as long as everyone's coming to class and they're doing their work, we can just continue most of this online. So take care, everybody.